for joining today. It is April 28th. Today is our next installment of our security awareness training presented by the National Cybersecurity Center in partnership with Optiv. We're excited today to talk about social engineering and specifically social engineering in the context of geopolitical risk, which obviously is a pertinent topic right now with everything that's going on. So my name is Jonah Wish. I'm the program lead here at the National Cybersecurity Center. We have Mr. James Turgal here from Optiv, who's going to speak on the topic for us. He's our guest speaker today. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then hand it off to him. He'll go for about 10-15 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat, and then what we'll do is we'll address them at the end there. And he's happy to help out and answer any questions that you have. So I'll give an intro and then hand it off. So Mr. Turgal right now specializes in, this is at Optiv, specializes in cyber risk, threats, strategy, incident response, and board relations. He provides subject matter expertise to C-suite executives, audit committees, and boards of directors, assisting clients in developing and executing cyber-focused strategy and security programs to prevent and minimize the business operations impact of cyber threats. Mr. Turgal joined Optiv after over 3 years in the cyber risk practice at Deloitte and a distinguished 22-year career with the FBI. During his time at the FBI, he served in executive roles as the special agent in charge of the Phoenix, Arizona office, C-suite roles as the assistant director, chief human capital officer, and culminated his career as the executive assistant director of global information technology and the FBI's chief information officer. Mr. Turgal has extensive experience in the aviation industry and is an accomplished private and instrument-rated pilot who flew air operations throughout his FBI career. So obviously we have a very tenured and experienced professional with us today to talk about a very important topic. So with that, James, I'll hand it off to you and to get us started.
No, I appreciate it, Jonah. Thank you so much for having me, and certainly everybody here, thank you for having me today. So I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to get started with this. So this is we're going to talk about the whole social engineering piece. One of the things that I didn't have on my bio, but kind of the reason why I'm the guy talking about cyber here with you is that during probably around 2002, 2003, I was actually sent out from FBI headquarters during one of my tours to the Cincinnati field office, and was the one who actually created and designed a cyber task force for the Cincinnati division. So I've been working cyber since the inception of the FBI's program. So I've worked it all. I've worked the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, Iran. I've worked, thousands of ransomware cases, thousands of phishing and malware cases. And that's what I bring today to Optiv, is that ability to actually explain the threat landscape, because I've worked these guys. I've arrested them, put them in jail, investigated the cases. So it really gives me a perspective that few others have. So let's kind of dive into this. So we went through my bio. So the cyber challenges, right? So this is we live in very interesting times now. So the whole advent of the Russia invasion of Ukraine has created this new world in how we think about both social engineering and phishing. So you have situations right now, which, in all of my experience and decades of work in cyber, I've never seen a situation where you actually are having a cyber war being perpetrated simultaneously with a kinetic war, right? So right now, the Russians are absolutely conducting both, right? Russia invades Ukraine in the latter part of February, but prior to that, they were utilizing cyber either social engineering, phishing campaigns, they were actually engaging in that, what I call softening up the battlefield. So there were attacks against Ukraine's critical infrastructure, their banking, their government systems, their government offices, their power grid, and their power infrastructure. And they did this a number of ways, right? So using botnets in order to increase the number of attacks that they can actually levy against a target in a certain period of time. A tremendous number of disruption or DDoS attacks, right? Dedicated denial of service attacks. Certainly a number of attacks for both what would use what we call wiperware or hermetic wiperware, which is really ransomware or malware that will go in and wipe a hard drive. So it's not designed to ransom it, really it's designed to destroy it. And all through either normal emails, they perpetrated through what we call business email compromise. So they're putting this type of malware in, and the social engineering in various types of emails, both personal and in business emails. And so there's, the new regulation piece, right? That has caused certainly our government and, the current administration here in the United States, and certainly our Western European allies to actually start to think about how do we legislate to help make our companies and countries stronger from this cyber threat. So you've got this whole group of organizations that are now running to try to catch up to figure out how do we keep ourselves safe. So let's talk about the themes. I spend a lot of time with boards of directors and audit committees. And if you look at the screen on the right-hand side, it's actually pretty frightening, right? A ransomware attack occurs every 11 seconds, right? Imagine that, every 11 seconds, and it causes, on average, a 19-day downtime. And it usually, so if you're a victim of normal malware, right? So you've got threat actors out there, especially the Russians and the Chinese. Some will infiltrate your systems, and they will literally sit in there for, on average, about 287 days before they either launch the attack, because they're combing through your networks, right? They're understanding what your ecosystem looks like. And I know this is really, it's complicated stuff. Cyber as a concept is very difficult to wrap your arms around. But one of the things I spend a lot of time with boards and audit committees is to try to put it in terms of something that they can really wrap their head around. And it's these risk themes. So if you take nothing away from today, right, think about cybersecurity, think about how your company works, or how your organization or your government agency works in these three things, right? It is all about data, ecosystems, and attack surface. So data, right? Data is everything. I've interviewed these guys, I put them in jail. The hackers, whether they're nation state actors, organized crime units, right? Or the 14-year-old who's sitting in his, grandma's basement in Belarus, hacking away with, Monster energy drinks sitting around, because we've all seen those kind of pictures. Data is everything, right? And it's you got to think about it differently, right? So it's data, but it's, do you know where your data is stored? Do you encrypt your data? Do you encrypt it at rest, or or actually at rest or in transit? Do you have backups of that data? And where are they stored? The bigger question, who has access to your data? There's a number of people, right? Everybody, gets access to a computer system when you start a new job, whether it's in the public or private sector, and your ability to have the right amount of access and give your employees just enough access for them to do their job without giving them too much access, right? There's a lot of data that certain employees don't necessarily need to actually have access to. So it's the right privileged access, and certainly looking at the holistic view of making sure that your data is backed up. And those backups are offline, right? I've worked a ton of ransomware cases where you have a victim company or a victim government organization, and they had backups, they backed up their data, but that backup was still sitting, in the same data center online with their regular network systems, and all of it was was locked down, right? All of it was encrypted and needed to be decrypted with a key. So data is everything. Ecosystems, right? Ecosystems are right? That's it's your data center. It's either hybrid cloud or a cloud offering, right? It's all of the places where you store, right, your data. It's all of the infrastructure and the networking systems, right? And making sure that you understand what is actually plugged into that ecosystem. There's a lot of a concept called asset management, which seems really boring, right? But I always talked about it in the FBI. You can't protect what you can't see, right? So if you can't see a particular, desktop or laptop or mobile device or server, if you don't see that on the network, you can't protect it. So you really have to understand what your ecosystem is and all of the devices that are attached to it. And attack surface, right? Attack surface are those endpoints, right? It's every desktop, laptop, smartphone, everything that attaches to your networks, right? Because every one of those could be a vulnerability if it's misconfigured or it's not configured in the right way, or if those individual devices have vulnerabilities, within themselves. So you really got to think of this as a holistic ecosystem, and all these three terms, right? These three themes are everything. So if you're working inside your organization and you start to break down, all right, now let's think about where our data is and let's think about who has access to it. All right, what does that ecosystem look like? And then put the tools in place to actually protect all of that attack surface to be able to keep yourself safe. Because these are the things that help you get past, right, and arm yourself against the phishing and the social engineering. So let's talk about the threat landscape. So the map here shows you some, and these are actual cases. These are actually Russian cases. Certainly a number of them. But you've got organizations within the Russian government. Some of these are from the GRU or the SVR, which is the Russian intelligence service. You have members of the Russian government and the Russian military. They're actually part of some of the proxy groups. They're actually taking and launching malware and launching ransomware. Conti, for example, is a ransomware group. Revil is a very well-known ransomware group. So there are ties back to the Russian government from into these ransomware groups. But you have, they have funny names like Voodoo Bear and Venomous Bear and Indrik Spider, kind of crazy names, but these are actual cases where you had ransomware hits and attacks on government organizations. Going back to 2004, the one that really interesting one, which was the Indrik Spider one in 2014 against financial institutions. And so you also see from a social engineering piece, you see this wave, and I see a trend now. So just as COVID was starting to grip the country, and you had lots of people out there who wanted information, who were looking at the maps that were being produced by the National Institutes of Health of where COVID was spreading. So you had these types of Russian and Chinese organized crime groups and nation state hacking groups who would take those maps of how COVID was spreading and actually embed malware in them. So when you clicked on them, right, it would launch malware within your system. So that's a really, what I believe a pretty insidious way of actually preying on people's fears, right, and launching malware, launching ransomware through not only emails, but also this concept of social engineering, where they're taking something that people want to see and they're actually embedding malware in it. So what we're seeing now that the in this geopolitical climate is watching the Russian government utilize social engineering and email compromise in a couple of different ways. So soon after the war started and Russia, launched its invasion inside Ukraine, there was a number of different Ukraine military email addresses and government email systems that were hacked by the Russians. So the Russians started sending out emails, from a, what would be considered a, Ukrainian military address to government agencies and to individuals, asking for information about troop movements and asking for information about refugee movements and the numbers of refugees moving through there. So they actually were posing as, either Ukrainian military folks or military members or members of the Ukrainian government, asking for that kind of information and launching malware at the same time. So a really, really terrible use of social engineering. You now have situations where the Russian government has been found to have hacked into Facebook and Instagram and a number of other different social media platforms, utilizing them as a disinformation campaign. So you're seeing social engineering go from not only email compromise and launching malware within not just clicking the link in an email or opening up a map, but there's also maps out there right now that you can see on CNN or any news agency where it shows the actual Russian movement or the Russian areas that are occupied, where Russia occupies areas within Ukraine. Right, those maps as well have embedded malware in them. So they're utilizing social engineering not just from a launching of malware technique, right, but also a disinformation campaign. Actually hacking into Facebook and Instagram and putting information out there about how, making statements like, the Ukrainian army has surrendered and laid down their arms in Mariupol, right? So that's not true, but it's actually out on those social media platforms trying to get people to believe that it is. And so you unfortunately have a very certainly well-funded, very skilled nation-state groups out there, specifically Russia and China, not so much North Korea and Iran. Most of the motivation of those of Iran and North Korea is really about funding their regime. They utilize a number of different ransomware techniques, literally because of all the sanctions that have been levied against them by the United States and Western countries in Europe, so that they're actually utilizing ransomware to fund their regime. So here's some other different examples. And these I really wanted to focus on the government agencies, right? So, government and infrastructure attacks in 2013, right? You've got, Operation Snake, which was another 2014 malware attack. You've got different phishing attacks against government organizations. Certainly there was some flight aspects of this as well. One of the things that I want to spend a couple minutes on is the non-Petya attack. So I get a lot of questions from boards and other organizations. They're like, why would the Russians or the Chinese care who I am, right? I don't have anything to steal. I don't have any information, that they would want. Why would they come after me? The problem with that question and that logic is you don't have to be the intended target. The Russians in 2017 launched the non-Petya ransomware attack, and it was designed to attack the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian power grid and their infrastructure. And while it did that, they embedded malware and the ransomware inside basic accounting software called MEDOC. Well, the Ukrainian government and a number of those organizations within Ukraine, used MEDOC as the accounting software, but so did the British National Health Service, so did Maersk International Shipping. Some 400 or 500 companies actually utilize that software. And when they downloaded an update, it launched the malware, right? So you had the poor CEO from Maersk trying to communicate with his ships at sea all over the globe using his cell phone and using WhatsApp. Right? So that's a really bad day for that particular CEO and company because everything went down. And Maersk wasn't the intended target, of the Russian government. The Ukraine infrastructure was. So you really don't have to be the intended target to be a victim. And more often than not, there are millions of botnets out there, right? And a botnet is just a computer that has, you've either gone to a website that has downloaded the malware onto your system, or you've clicked a link and it has launched malware on your system. And what it does is it basically uses your computer at home, which could be as literally a little zombie computer, that while you're asleep at night, that compute power is actually being utilized to launch cyber attacks. And there are millions of these all over the world. So again, you don't have to be the intended target, right? And you certainly don't have to be the ones that the Russian government is really thinking about. You can just be a victim as well. Here's a couple of snapshots. One of this APT 2028 group, also known as Fancy Bear, is one of the most prolific Russian nation state groups out there. They are certainly, they were the ones responsible for the hack of the Democratic National Congressional Campaign and the DNC before the 2020 election. Just a tremendous, they've been around for a number of years. I've run a number of cases against Fancy Bear. Sometimes you end up, being able to arrest some of these folks if you can actually lure them out of Russia or other countries where they're at. But more often than not, unfortunately, we may take law enforcement action against them. You may, indict them, but it's really hard to arrest them sometimes. One of the other, let me get you to another group. So Voodoo Bear, right? This is also called Sandworm. So this group was in the news just 2 or 3 days ago. This group actually was the one that launched not only launched the attacks against the Ukrainian power grid prior to the invasion, but also launched an additional attack against the Ukrainian power grid in the southern areas or the southeastern areas of Ukraine by Russian groups. They are a prolific group. This actually connected to the GRU, which is actually a functioning military unit inside the Russian government. And most of them, all they do is cyber warfare, cyber espionage. It is a group that has a number of different members are former military, Russian military individuals, Russian intelligence officers. But they have been responsible for a tremendous number of attacks going back, into the early 2000s. The NotPetya attack that I talked about earlier, the French presidential campaign, the Winter Olympics. These guys have been doing this for a very, very, very long time. So one of the things, you ask, wow, that's scary stuff, and there's all kinds of threats out there with social engineering and phishing campaigns, and what do you do? How do you attack this, right? So here are some things on the screen that you should be asking questions about. How do we scan for the vulnerabilities that are in our systems, right? Maybe you've heard the term 0-day vulnerability, right? So that it's software, right? It's code, and that code has holes in it, and no matter what kind of software engineer you have, there's always holes in that code as it's being manipulated and applied to different applications. So it's all about scanning for those vulnerabilities. And the big part here is really this awareness and training. And that's why I really applaud the National Cybersecurity Center and the state of Colorado for really setting this up and being able to bring individuals like me in to have that conversation and provide that awareness and training. Because the knowledge of the threat actors out there, how they think about it, and what they're after is really, really important for you to protect yourself. Also doing intrusion detection systems, cyber threat hunting, which is really about you going through and looking into your systems and making sure that you're actually doing either penetration testing or or other types of testing to make sure your systems are safe. Some key takeaways, right? This is some of the things these threat actors are after, right? It's critical infrastructure, supply chain, right? The use of ransomware. You always really want to understand the world around you, right? There's lots of new and expanded regulations that are coming out. We've all heard about problems with the supply chain. So the cyber impacts, certainly the cyber attacks on the supply chain have slowed it down even more than COVID and the current situation going on over in Eastern Europe. So I want to save time for a few minutes for questions. So what questions do you guys have?
Hi, James. This is Jonah. I got a question here directly to me. Question is, what does social engineering in an email normally look like? Is it mainly impersonation, like you said, or attachments? Can you speak more to that front?
Yeah, absolutely. So social engineering emails, some of them are really, they look like normal emails, right? So they will be providing, a lot of them come in spam emails, right? So you get emails that say, hey, you've won $100 Amazon card, right? And then you click on that and that launches malware. You can also be very careful about when you're opening up emails that you don't know who they're coming from, right? Look in that header and look and make sure all the actual words are spelled correctly. Look at the type of email and who it's coming from. Look at the body of it, right? Don't click on anything in it unless you know exactly who it's from. But it can come in a number of different ways. But certainly the threat actors out there are getting better and better at putting together emails that look absolutely, like something you get from your bank. So if you're a Bank of America customer, for example, right, they'll put Bank of America logos in these emails. So you got to be very, very careful about what you click on, and actually go through and read it before you click anything and open it.
Excellent, thank you. I got another one directly to me here. It says, I hear a lot that, like you're saying, that just being vigilant of what emails are coming in is kind of priority number one. Is there anything else that my organization can do to mitigate social engineering throughout the organization, aside from just filtering emails and such?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly having good tools, having good filters on those the email systems, but it goes back to what I talked about in one of the key takeaways, which is the training and awareness. You actually need to have an organization that tests its employees, using phishing tests. 92% of all malware launched out there in the world is launched through what we call business email compromise. Right, so they're taking emails and they are putting malware and embedding ransomware inside it, and it really doesn't matter. I mean, I've worked cases where the brand new employee at the lowest level of the organization has clicked the link and launched the malware. Right, I've worked just as many cases where the CEO clicked the link and launched the malware. Right, so the threat actors don't care what level of the organization you're in. Certainly, there's other types of social engineering called whaling and spear phishing, where they're actually targeting senior executives and targeting the CEO, targeting board members. So literally, the training and awareness and having all of those tools to do the filters is it really takes an entire ecosystem to combat this.
Excellent, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat here. I'll give one more kind of call for questions. Does anyone else have any final questions? Going once, going twice. All right. we're going to close it out. So James, thank you again for joining us today for our April installment of our security awareness training. We're very grateful that all of you decided to join us today. So thank you to everyone that could hop in. James, thank you for your time, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This is a great environment to do this in, and I just really appreciate you lending some time for me to talk about cybersecurity on behalf of Optiv.
Yeah, absolutely. Same to you.
Take care.
Okay, take care, everybody.